Hey, good afternoon. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope everybody is doing great. And for those of you that are in frozen tundra land, I hope you're all staying warm inside in a smoke filled room, enjoying your favorite premium cigar. And at this point, a good spirit to get you through the week. This is Scott Pierce, the executive director of the Premium Cigar Association, and Joshua Habursky, head of government affairs for PCA, and our good friend Glenn Lube, our advisor, who works with us on state advocacy issues here at PCA. We are coming to you live today to discuss the, I think mountain is probably too light of a term to refer to the amounts of bills and taxes and all the other things that we're working on throughout the various states in this great country of ours. But that's what we're here to do. We're going to dissect some of those things for you today, talk about some stuff and some other initiatives that we've got going on. And so without any further ado, Joshua Habursky, please, the floor is yours to go out there and explain to everybody in Premium Cigar Land what is going on in the Federal and Regulatory Affairs Department.
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it. You know, it's been an interesting few weeks. We definitely have gotten off to a strong start, a fast start. Glenn and I have been searching through hundreds of bills over the past, few weeks, and some of them amount to, concerns that we've heightened and sent out advisory alerts to members in over a dozen states. We've been working closely with state allies, state retailers, and state association partners on a variety of different issues. Fortunately, on the tax front, it's a little bit of a surprise. We haven't seen a ton of tax increases on premium cigars in particular yet. That's not to say that those won't be upcoming. But right now, my tally that I'm keeping score of is we have more tax caps that have been introduced than tax increases, which is a good thing to see. And, Glenn has been working steadfastly in states like New York and Montana. And I'm going to kick it over to him to kind of give an update. And then I'll talk a little bit about a new project that we're putting together as a result of some of our efforts this week.
Well, I guess that's my cue. Josh, Scott, thank y'all a lot. And, I'm having a flashback sitting here because what was it, Scott? We started doing the state briefings and sessions August, October of last year.
Yep. Right around it was actually split those two. It was in September when we started holding them.
September and October. And at that moment, I remember us talking to the listening audience and Josh and I saying, it's so easy for the premium cigar industry to get caught up into the vape regulatory phenomenon, and that the impact of legislation of inadvertent sweeping up of premium handmade cigars into the vape and e-cigarette debate is one of the truest threats that confronts this industry. I think that moment is almost prophetic to what we've experienced since January. And when Josh said that we're surprised, and we are genuinely surprised that there's not this mammoth influx of tax increase bills as a result of the pandemic, because the checks have been written and it's been an expensive endeavor and the economic recovery has cost money. And we thought we saw into a crystal ball that the bills were going to come due, but the states really haven't gone there. But what it has proven is that there is a behind-the-scenes national agenda that's preset. And I'm having a flashback, too, of reading the handbook of the body parts lobby, heart, lung, cancer, and the rest of the nonprofit healthcare community, where they've got a handbook. I've got a copy of it buried in one of these stacks behind me. And it says no exemptions of any kind, even for cigars. And that's on smoking bans and then taxes. And that's their game plan. Well, they're very well organized and they're very well orchestrated. And one piece of legislation that has taken the place of smoking bans and tax measures this year seems to be licensing, and states allowing local governments to require local licensing and states requiring new levels of licensing in the spirit of that this is going to help thwart underage smoking. And we're going to grant greater local control to the regulation of tobacco as a whole to local governments. And that seems to be their mission from God this year, because when it's in states as diverse as Indiana and Oregon, or the New England states in the South, you know that it's an orchestrated thing. That type of legislation just doesn't happen by osmosis. It's very intentionally planted by that sector of the advocacy community for the public health sector. So with that, what I want to do is I'll go down through a list of some of the major state issues that Josh and I have been working with state parties and counterparts and colleagues and PCA members with for really since, it feels like months and months ago, but only since January, when over 40 state legislatures began to come into session. The local licensing and authority to regulate bill came on the heels of the tax increase referendum in the state of Oregon. A place that I wish I could say I was surprised at, but a similar bill, plus allowing local governments taxing authority independent of the state over tobacco, and that was in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And a House member and a Senate member, and obviously Kentucky's a tobacco state, not our kind of tobacco, but a tobacco state. That legislation worries me almost number 2 in the country. And it's going to be very important for J. Paul Tucker and Jim Clark and others with shops and lounges in the state of Kentucky to get to Frankfurt and work on that. And we'll be chatting more about that. Likewise in Indiana, I'll come back to New York. We want to thank Marvin Holthauser for giving testimony in the state of Florida. He showed up in enemy territory, literally, because he knew what he was walking into, because this bill to allow local governments to regulate smoking, and specifically in state parks and beach smoking under the domain of the local governments, comes up every year. But it's like a lot of other places in the country where, and I'll use Pennsylvania as an example, same bill will come up every year. Well, it's kind of a warning. I'm convinced that there comes a period of time when that type of legislation becomes more of a threat than others. And it has not historically been a threat. That legislation has historically died to allow local governments to regulate smoking in Florida. But there will be a day when it will be a far more serious threat. So the groundwork has to be laid now. And it's marvelous that Marvin showed up to speak against the Senate bill. He got a great deal of media attention by giving that local testimony, that testament, because his shop's over in Destin, not far from the beach. He talks about people buying cigars and then taking a walk on the beach, and literally that could hypothetically be outlawed if the local government so desired. And so we also worked with Marvin to prepare a background piece on what the premium cigar industry means to the state of Florida specifically. And he shared that, and I'm glad that he got the media attention that he did. Tax increase and smoking ban introduced in Mississippi. It's a proverbial action in the state of Mississippi, but I have every optimism, like Florida, that the Mississippi measures will pass away as well. I got to really hand it to Andy Kirstein and Gary Colser in the state of New Jersey. They have worked diligently locally with legislators that they have built relationships with to get an exemption for premium cigar shops that will be defined by statute, away from a bill that Josh, I'll say, issued the warning for last year. I think it was late last year, wasn't it, Josh, when you discovered the bill that would require anybody that sells tobacco to also carry nicotine cessation products, nicotine cessation drugs, basically, and require that. So it just makes perfect sense. I mean, and I say that facetiously, but to require that of a premium cigar shop, where we've clearly demonstrated that premium handmade cigars don't have the public health implications associated with other tobacco products, and introducing, and these types of bills are an opportunity actually to educate legislators that are not familiar, as they should be, with premium handmade cigars, that we don't carry the addiction, inhalation, and mortality implications associated with other tobacco products. And when you bring that up to legislators and prove that through the research that PCA has worked to amass through the FDA regulatory process, it's an eye-awakening experience. And I've said for years upon years, if there was any virtue, if there was any good to come out of the federal regulatory process, is that it has forced this industry to study itself. And now this mountain of research on the public health side, and then the studies that have come as a result of both the result of and during the federal regulatory process, has now given us the political ammunition we need to fight these types of bills at the state level. And I think New Jersey is a great case in point. And I can't say enough for Andy and Gary working with their local legislators, working with sponsors of the bills to get themselves out from under that legislation. The legislation in Pennsylvania that would close all of the exemptions, Josh and I conducted a conference call with the sponsor of that legislation. I think, again, it was another classic case of education, who absolutely told Josh and I and Greg Zimmerman he wasn't familiar with the economic impact that premium cigars had on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And once again, introducing the data that works to our advantage in that regard. And again, every anticipation that bill would die, but it's an education process, and you never know which year it's going to be that it gets more traction than not. Once again, another local licensing, local taxing authority measure in the state of Missouri. And just this morning, PCA, we issued an alert regarding, and it was a bill that was introduced, I want to say unbeknownst to us, but thankfully that we were asked to support it, was a bill that would allow cigar lounges, cigar bars, if you will, to come to the state of Montana. And I think what the good part about that really is that it's a great small business measure. Two, that it came from a legislative source. And it came at this unique economic time. So I think if you read the petition that PCA issued this afternoon, we're really painting that as a pro small business measure. And it's a great model piece of legislation for other states to emulate. And before I take questions or we start a more in-depth dialogue, I want to talk about our great friends in New York. The New York Tobacconists Association, like New Jersey, like Virginia, like a handful of others around the country, are really becoming working models for PCA on how local leadership can drive a state association, which is something I know Scott's going to talk more about in a second. But the New York Tobacconists Association pulled together a meeting yesterday that Josh and I were a party to with a member of the state assembly, which is always a unique and welcomed opportunity, to talk about ways to mitigate threats to them, to have some proactive measures on the tax cap front, to talk about enhanced cigar lounges through liquor licenses and those types of opportunities through the state legislature, making a stamp for themselves in Albany. And it was a great demonstration of how retailers are really taking to heart something that I told the guys in Virginia in 2006. I said, you're no longer a tobacconist. Politics is now in your job description. And if you're going to work to protect this industry, if you're going to work to advance this industry, you now have to do it. This is an ingrained part of your very professional being. And the guys in New York and gals are really taking that to heart and are working a very complex, very difficult state to do business in, to try to make it better politically for their businesses. And I think it's a real testament. So I think really what the folks did in Virginia to mitigate the licensing threat there, what Gary and Andy have done in New Jersey, what the association's done in Texas, what they're doing in New York, what Marvin did in Florida in terms of showing it for testimony. All these are amazing examples of how far the advocacy community has come as a partnership, as a team between the Josh and Scott's and I's and the like, building those partnerships, doing that type of training, maintaining open lines of communication on these types of measures is working to better protect politically the premium handmade cigar industry. So far, so good. I think that if I were to rank these problems, there's a threat of a piece of a tax bill in New York that would take the OTP there to 129% of wholesale. Secondly, the Kentucky licensing and tax bill and go down from there. But we've obviously got some threats, but I'm very hopeful about what the state legislative season will mean to the industry by all of us working together. So
Yeah.
with that, I know I've rambled a lot, but I hope that kind of sets the stage of what we're dealing with what I count to be approximately 14 states that are truly in play, if you will, of legislation that we have to think about.
Absolutely. And I think, Glenn, you really touched on it, that we have a ton of state associations and state partners stepping up across the country on a variety of different issues. And we're going to see more of them. Oklahoma and Texas late this week released several different bills that we're tracking and monitoring in Illinois. So those three states, I would caution folks there to be on the lookout for alerts in early next week as we go through those. We are seeing, as expected, the cluster of flavored tobacco products that we're going through and releasing a variety of alerts on those. So that is one thing that's been apparent. And then, of course, the local licensure there. What are the other things that I want to touch on? And this has come up in a few occasions. We've had members reach out to us and state partners about COVID restrictions. And, from the onset early last year, PCA wanted to be at the forefront to make sure that we were active and advocating on your behalf with all levels of government to ensure that we were getting the resources we needed, whether it be PPP or guidance on health, safety, and sanitation measures. And, all of those resources are still available on premiumcigars.org. We're not out of the woods with the pandemic, and we recognize that. And we want to make sure that all of the businesses, small business, retail lounges are in compliance with those guidelines. But it has come to our attention that in some states and localities, tobacco businesses are being unfairly singled out or treated as it relates to some of the restrictions and shutdowns. So we're going to be doing next week on Monday, sending a notice out to our members. If you are in a state or locality where you're singled out and you're not allowed to have your lounge access, nobody's allowed to be there or participate and enjoy cigars, reach out to us, kind of let us know the bullet points. We have templated letters that we can help facilitate conversations and ask for accommodations. I think it's also important that we articulate all of the positive things and all of the considerations that you're doing already as members to tackle the pandemic, but we can assist on that front. So please do send us that information so that we can work on that. The folks in Maryland did an incredible job in Baltimore getting 50% of the lounge access this week. So we want to see that, make sure that we're having the businesses open safely and securely, but again, not being unfairly treated just because they're in the tobacco industry. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Also, I mentioned earlier that we have a habit of getting caught up into the vape and e-cigarette phenomenon. We also get caught up into legislation that's clearly targeting more mass market tobacco products. Having a flashback here, I just think if the industry had been watching this stuff, if you will, 20 years ago, how different the political landscape would be today. But it proves that it's an education process. I've seen on so many occasions where the light bulb goes off in a legislator's mind when they learn that not all cigars are the same, not all tobacco products are the same, not everything ought to be taxed the same, not everything ought to be regulated the same. And when the retail community comes together to sell that message, to educate these members, they do truly get it. 8, 9 times out of 10, they truly get it. And that's enabled this industry to make a political claim and a political stake out there that it's never had before. And I think it's demonstrating how clearly that retailers are becoming better advocates for themselves. there's only so much of Josh and I to go around. We kind of learned that in the last 3-4 weeks. And again, having the Garys in New Jersey and the Mike Glenns in New York and the Scott Reginas and Shorties and Gary Peshes in Virginia, Paul in Texas, to have these folks doing this stuff at the grassroots level like that, where they're selling these messages to their members of the legislature, has been invaluable to improving the advocacy of this industry.
On that note, just to say real quick, one of the main things that we're looking forward to doing is we started to reach out, and we're going to start establishing, now that we've got our bylaws, state association bylaws and the affiliation agreement set. That's one of the main ways that we're going to be able to maintain this infrastructure, so that way, as these issues continue to come around, because there's never not going to be a time when we're going to need to have strong messaging. We're not going to have connections with state legislatures. There's always going to be something for us to do, and the best way for us to have success is to have continuous relationships with state legislatures at that local level. And in order for us to be able to bring to bear the association resources and the national resources in the most effective way, is to have a coordinated effort between the state associations and the national association. And so now we've got this infrastructure that's ready to go, so that way, that as we continue to move forward, one of the best parts about all of this is we can start to look for proactive legislation, whether it's tax cap issues or whether it's, like Montana and some of these other places for cigar bars and some of these other instances, or exemption. And now that we've got a federal definition, we can start to march forward with that and use that. And again, it's all about making sure that we have good relationships, good quality relationships with those at the state legislatures, because that's how we're actually going to have friends that want to help us. And that's going to be the most important part in that is connecting us with our resources with you at that local level with those relationships. And so we're very much looking forward to enacting this, so that we have an infrastructure that is sustainable, that we can grow from the grassroots level in your stores with your customers and with your colleagues that own cigar stores and lounges in the state in which you reside and operate. That's how we're going to have success. And so we're very much looking forward to building that out this year.
And for folks, one of the goals of the association that we set out, Scott and Glenn have helped really crystallize this, is providing transparency to the government affairs program. So you can go on our website, premiumcigars.org, and see all of the different bills that Glenn and I are tracking. The ones that, some that we take positions on. It's in an easily accessible map. And then Glenn and I are also working to create resources that can be universal or standardized, so that if we create model legislation that works in Montana, there's an example that somebody can pull in another state and then adapt it according to the state-specific political factors. So we will create that. If you go on cigaraction.org, there's a policy resource section, and that's where you'll see stuff like that. I think the New York example of the work that Glenn has spearheaded there with the state association really put the onus on all of us to get a lot of data and research as it relates to tax caps. So we're hopeful that can translate into some of these other states that are considering tax cap legislation too. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time.
Along those lines, I want to thank my former colleague Cody Carden at CRA for helping us out on that. And it shows that great partnership that we've all got, and the communication that we've all got, is that because of that and because of the groundwork Josh and Cody had laid together, we presented 11 model tax cap bills to New York yesterday. 11 other, and it helps in the states to show that they're not alone. If they can see that another state's done it, especially states that are near them, and that a state like New Jersey is making progress with one, it helps reinforce the political message of the legislature, that it's not a new phenomenon and that there's truly an economic benefit to it. We presented 5 working models for cigar bar legislation, and that was before Montana this morning. I mean, to show a member of the state assembly in New York that here's 5 working models that you can draw from for cigar bars and 11 working models you can draw from for tax caps. It really is the type of research that a member like that needs to sell our message to his colleagues, and frankly, we just need to replicate that across the country. And if I were to ask or wish for anything in terms of the next level of advocacy, it's able to put economic numbers around that. We need to readily be able to demonstrate the tax cap benefit that's been experienced in Rhode Island, experienced in Connecticut, experienced in the state of Washington. And I think once we put that piece of the puzzle together, we'll have a very, very complete package.
Yeah.
And just real quick, I was just going to respond real quick to this question on here about how do we kind of fight back when so much of the conversation is around the nicotine used in vapes and e-cigs and how that's different from tobacco. And that's a great question. It was good seeing you last week, by the way, out there in Idaho at the vault and for the event. But, one of the main things that we take on, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, now that we have a federal definition and that has been exempted and it's completely different from the PMTA and the constituent testing and everything else that vaping has to go through in order to come to market, that gives us a great way to go to the state legislatures and say, look, at a federal level, we have this delineation and we have been recognized as something very, very different. And we have also been recognized as not part of the youth access problem. So we have that arrow that's a very strong arrow that's in our quiver. And the second part is going back to what I was saying earlier, the constant fostering of these relationships provides us numerous opportunities for education and interaction with the local legislatures and policymakers so that they understand this on a much more nuanced level, so that when policy does come up, they do have an understanding, or at the very, very least, they know who to call in order to get a better understanding when this kind of policy would then be enacted, so that they know to tailor it. And that's what we've been after all along: tailored policy, tailored regulation, so that way we're not the dolphin caught in the vaping tuna net.
If I were to beg and plead for anything during this conversation, it's that every retailer in America put cigaraction.org on their website. Please put Cigar Action on your website. Just whenever you're sending out all your emails about your sales, your events, your promotions, your office hours, make sure it's attached to that Cigar Action link that that PCA has, so that the PCA can build its consumer outreach and messaging with you and for you. Please put Cigar Action on your websites.
Absolutely. And then, in the coming weeks, we'll be having a further discussion on some of our federal outreach and, as things in Congress shape up. But for the purpose of this, we kind of want to give everybody a state and local overview of where things stand. There's going to be a multitude of different challenges that pop up, across the country. We're going to, do our best and fight for these. There's three of us working, and Ryan, we got to give him a shout out, our research assistant, who's done an incredible job in putting these pieces together. And, we're definitely tackling a lot. But, we ask for your patience, your persistence, and your assistance as we, tackle all of these challenges. We're not going to win all of them, but we're going to put up a fighting chance in anything that we do.
On that note, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And Glenn, Joshua, enjoy your weekends as well. And we'll for us, our weekends will always continue because bills keep coming up. We get basically about 100 plus every single day that we have to go through. It's been well over 1,000 at this point. So, but anyway, we'll keep the charge moving forward on Monday as we keep going and fighting the good fight for you all. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Josh, Glenn, my best to you as well. Stay safe and stay puffing, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.